Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Scott from Fudge Muppet. Sit back, relax, and get ready for the long-awaited final episode of the Is It Worth It series. What is the Is It Worth It series, you ask? Well, we all have a favourite race in the Elder Scrolls, but you have to remember, when you are playing the game, you are doing quite that, playing a character. However, this would be a vastly different experience to living a life as that certain race in the actual world. So instead of thinking in mere terms of gameplay, of which all the pros and cons are clear, we're going to think in terms of a lore context. Imagine that you are a soul destined to be thrust into the world of Tamriel as one of the 10 playable races of the Elder Scrolls game series. Which race would you be? Which race is worth it? These are the questions that we have answered in this series of videos. Today, I'm back to bring you the final episode of this Is It Worth It series for the races. In the description below are all the previous episodes, as well as the older ones on vampires and werewolves. Now, of course, this kind of video has a lot of variables, including personal preference, but we have done our best to analyze each of these races and determine whether or not they are worth being. So, today, let's look at the pros and cons, the benefits and detriments to being a Dark Elf, the Dunmer. Is being a Dunmer worth it? So before we dive into the topic itself, let's set some things straight. In the previous videos in the series, we explained the parameters thoroughly, but just to recap, we are making two assumptions to add some consistency to the evaluation. One, we are assuming that each race is born in their homeland, and two, we are talking about a contemporary context, meaning the time of Skyrim, which is the 201st year of the 4th era. But yes, that's all we need to know. Time to get down into the nitty-gritty. So for this video, if we were a soul in the Elder Scrolls universe that could choose to be any of the playable races, would being a Dunmer be worth it? Let's begin. The Dunmer, the Dark Elves, the Ashen Skin, Red Eyes, cursed people of Morrowind. Once they were the Chimer, the Changed Ones, who left the Somerset Isles under the guidance of their prophet Veloth. They chose to remain practicing close ancestor worship rather than revering only the greatest of their ancestors like the Aldmer chose to do. The Chimer exodus could have only happened with the assistance of the three Daedra, Mephala, Azura, and Boethia, and for this reason they would become the foundation of Dunmeri worship, considered the three good Daedra. This is one such thing that you would have to come to terms with if you chose to be a Dunmer born in Morrowind. They are Daedra worshippers, and they have a very unorthodox faith compared to most of the other races of Tamriel. Where Daedra worship is scorned in other provinces, in Morrowind it's a fundamental part of their religion. However, it is worth noting that it's not just any Daedra, but specifically the three good Daedra that are revered. In fact, certain Daedra are actively disliked, only appeased, so they do not reap havoc. These Daedra are known as the Four Corners of the House of Troubles. So while it may appeal to you to worship Daedra, you must be wary of the cultural distaste for Mehrunes Dagon, Sheogorath, Malakath, and Molag Bal. So if you are open to Daedra worship and aren't particularly sold on those four Daedric princes, then I think you might be pretty safe. It's true that for thousands of years Morrowind was ruled by the Tribunal of Living Gods, Almalexia, Sothosil, and Vivec. However, in the 4th era, it has been over 2 centuries since their demise and demotion from gods to saints in the Dunmer canon. As a Dunmer born in Morrowind, living during the 201st year of the 4th era, you would have been brought up worshipping the so-called Reclamations, Azura, Boethia, and Mephala, who reclaimed their spots as the true tribunal deserved of Dunmer worship. You may think this Daedra worship is strange, maybe you would simply brand it as evil, but there is far more to the Dunmeri faith than just revering these Daedric princes. For starters, ancestor worship and importance on family, loyalty, and bloodline are all very sacred to the Dunmer. Homes usually have an alcove with a family shrine, or entire tombs as dedicated resting places, which are very well looked after. So if you are considering whether or not you would be a Dunmer, you should consider that the Dunmer are generally very family-oriented, which may be a big plus for you. However, this would be a lot less of a deal if you were of House Telvanni, but they are a bit of an enigma anyways when compared to the other houses. Beyond this, there is a greater cultural undertone that shapes Dunmer philosophy on life, and that, my friends, is the Psijic Endeavour, which can be summed up by saying it's essentially the idea that one can achieve enlightenment through suffering. It is the endeavour to reach divinity, that is to say reach Kim, which is to say reach heaven by violence. This philosophy has coloured the entire culture as a whole. Conflict is born into the Dunmer society. Great houses among many smaller houses vie for power and try to assert themselves, and they are fiercely xenophobic and rail against all the other races. This xenophobia is something that in recent centuries has caused them many problems. For thousands of years, the Dunmer took many Argonian slaves, and after the Oblivion Crisis, this bit them on the butt when the Argonians banded together and mounted a bloody invasion of Morrowind. It was only thanks to House Redoran that the Argonians didn't take all of the land, and it was for this reason that House Redoran has now become the dominant house. You may have played The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind and seen all the beautiful architecture and rich culture, but you must consider that in the Fourth Era, Morrowind is a shadow of its former self. After the eruption of Red Mountain, Vvardenfell was decimated, and to this day the Red Mountain continues to bellow ash across the land, reaching as far as Solstheim and likely causing unfavourable conditions in a wide radius surrounding Vvardenfell. It is at this point in time unknown how it has affected the flora and fauna of the land, but it would be fair to say that the Dunmer have adapted well, considering that nearly 200 years later, they are still chugging on. I would think it fair to assume that slavery is practically non-existent after the thrashing they received from the Argonians, but this could be wrong and slavery is still going. However, as far as we can tell, it doesn't seem to be a thing on Raven Rock at all, which is a Dunmer-controlled settlement. It's also interesting to know that Argonians have actually raided Raven Rock recently in the year 150 of the Fourth Era, which to me at least indicates that the Argonians are likely harassing all other areas of Morrowind, and perhaps it could be argued that due to this, Morrowind is a less secure place, with Dunmer control not as solid as it has been in the past. Consider that many Dunmer have fled the province in seek of better homes. It doesn't paint the prettiest picture of the land. To me, it seems like a land of ash clouds and Argonian raiders, with the few cities, farms, and settlements protected by Dunmer warriors. But it would seem that the Argonians are behind enemy lines even over 100 years later after the initial invasion. In terms of enjoying your homeland, it sounds like you won't be, to be honest. It's probably one of the worst points in history for the Dark Elves. They are in tatters by comparison to eras prior, and their xenophobic attitude has not given them a really great reputation with the other races of Tamriel. They aren't looked upon favourably. Argonians and Khajiit are most likely to hate them. The Nords and Orcs have had conflicts with them for ages, and as for every other race, they are opposed in the very least at the idea of Daedra worship, but of course, there are many more reasons. Foreign relations aren't a Dark Elf's strong suit. So culturally there are some good things, and depending on your stance on Daedra worship, there are some bad things or more good things. In terms of homeland, it's pretty smashed up and foreign relations are poor, likely making it difficult for you if you want to travel to other lands peacefully. But what about biologically? What do the Dark Elves have to offer in terms of abilities and attributes? As a race of elves, they, like the other types of elves, experience potentially very long lifespans, seemingly dependent on various factors including luck of the draw and magic. At the time of Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, Dyvaith Fear was over 4,000 years old. So you get the long lifespan, and Dunmer are also resistant to fire, and by extension, heat, meaning they are suited to the volcanic wastes of their homeland. They are said to have strong and agile physiques, as well as powerful intellects, attributes which lend themselves to creating powerful warriors and sorcerers. Some of the greatest wizards alive belong to House Telvanni. And Dark Elves are naturally suited to be battle mages, inclined to be both good with a blade and bow, as well as destruction magic, which is somewhat of a calling card for the Dunmer. So for me at least, the long lifespan alone works to convince me of this choice, and being a battle mage seems like the best of both worlds. I think being a Redoran battle mage fighting for my family and ancestors, striving to further my house, sounds really cool. We also have to consider here that I'm incredibly biased about the Dunmer, because I just love their culture so much. They're really unique and fresh amongst the other, more typical cultures. However, to be honest, particularly in the Fourth Era, I don't think being a Dunmer is actually worth it. The lifespan can be achieved by being either Bosmer or Altmer, and when you consider the absolute wrecked state of Morrowind, in addition to foreign perceptions of your race, it's kind of a double whammy. If you stay in Morrowind, it kinda sucks, and if you leave, it probably still sucks for you. As much as I like the idea of being a Dark Elf in the Fourth Era, even though I would probably love it, life would be objectively harder, and there are many challenges that you would face. It would seem silly to pick Dunmer if I could then be any of the other races. If it were another time in Dunmer history, during the Golden Age of the Tribunal especially, then I would definitely say it's worth it, because of the glorious state of your homeland. However, we are talking the Fourth Era, so I don't think it's worth it. You may very well think it's still worth it, and you may enjoy life as a fundamentalist Dunmer, even with all the challenges, but there you go, you have my answer. What do you think? Do you think being a Dunmer living in Morrowind during the 201st year of the 4th era is worth it? I'd love to hear what you guys think down below in the comments. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this Is It Worth It series. We have now done one for each of the 10 playable races in the Elder Scrolls series, and if you've missed any of them, do head down into the description where you can find them all linked, along with our social media accounts where you can follow us and stay up to date with all things Fudge Muppet. Do please like the video if you enjoyed it, and do subscribe for more awesome Elder Scrolls content, as well as future Outer Worlds and Cyberpunk builds, guides, lore, and more. Thank you so much for being such fantastic supporters of our channel. It means so much to us. My name is Scott from Fudge Muppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.